Welcome to this special edition of Balkans Debrief. I'm Ilva Tare, a resident senior fellow at the Europe Center. As we close out 2025, the Western Balkans are under mounting pressure, strained by internal political fractures, democratic backsliding, and deep uncertainty in a rapidly shifting global order. The US Congress has made it clear that this pluralistic, multi-ethnic region remains critical to Europe's peace, stability, and prosperity. Against that backdrop, the release of the new U.S. National Security Strategy and the sweeping National Defense Authorization Act for 2026, signed into law by President Trump on December 18th, signal a fundamental recalibration of American foreign policy. Many analysts across the region describe this as the most consequential strategic shift since the fall of the Berlin Wall. U.S. actions on the ground underscore that shift. Unprecedented sanctions targeting Serbia's ties to Russia in Nice, a more assertive American role on the Kosovo-Serbia normalization progress and process, and explicit congressional mandates written directly into the NDAA. For the first time in years, Congress has placed the Western Balkans squarely at the center of U.S. strategic thinking, naming Kosovo-Serbia normalization a national security priority, calling for immediate implementation of the Ohrid Agreement, and reaffirming sustained U.S. leadership. And yet, contradictions persist. In October, the administration lifted sanctions on Milorad Dodik and his network. At the same time, the NDAA mandates that no later than 90 days after enactment, President Trump shall impose sanctions on individuals or entities whose actions threaten peace, security, stability, territorial integrity, democratic progress, or the institutions of the Western Balkans. All of this is unfolding as Europe itself undergoes a historic transformation, rebuilding the defense capacity and war in its continent, in Ukraine, while pushing renewed momentum for EU enlargement. Montenegro and Albania are moving quickly. North Macedonia remains blocked by veto, and Bosnia and Herzegovina is still paralyzed by entrenched divisions. So today we ask two essential questions. What truly changed for the Western Balkans in 2025 under the administration of President Trump? And what should we be watching closely in 2026? To help us make sense of this moment, we are joined by 5 exceptional experts, each with decades of experience in region and here in Washington. Allow me to welcome Ambassador Chris Hill, Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council.
My pleasure.
Valbona Zeneli, Non-Resident Senior Fellow. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Maja Piscevic, Non-Resident Senior Fellow.
Thank you, Ilva.
Great to have you here. Jonathan Moore, a Non-Resident Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center.
Good morning. Happy holidays.
And welcome Amanda Thorpe, Non-Resident Senior Fellow. I will start immediately this special edition of Balkans Debrief with a first question. After 1 year of Trump administration, how should we assess U.S. policy toward the Western Balkans? Some argue that the national security strategy represents the most dramatic shift in U.S. foreign policy in decades. What does this mean for security and deterrence in the region? And do you agree with this assessment? Chris, I'll start with you, Ambassador.
Yeah, I mean, it's rather difficult to determine really what this year has meant in terms of the Trump administration and the Balkans, because I'm not sure the Trump administration knows what it wants to do. Certainly, one element is a sense of deep distrust and lack of interest in any comprehensive cooperation with the European Union. So that's a big change because we've, for years, I would even say decades, have had at the center of our policy the notion that we want these countries to join the EU. And the only questions that used to come up was, well, should they join one by one? Should we try to get the whole group coming in on the theory that if you have them join one by one, you create more tensions? You know, these kinds of of issues, but no one really challenged the fundamental view that somehow their entering the EU is a good thing. So that's one thing that's really, I think, yet to be determined, although that national security statement was pretty clear. The second thing, of course, is if not the EU, then is it going to be individual contacts? Is it going to be some kind of relationship with each? And what we've seen is, in effect, a downgrading of relations so that as of a week or two from now, there will not be a single ambassador in the region. So does that tell you something? Or does it just say they're not interested in ambassadors? So I would say it's a very mixed picture at this point. Certainly a very tough view on Dodik. A tough view on Nice on the issue of energy for Serbia, but not much of a helping hand there yet. And yet a kind of a strange view where Dodik has offered a deal, but there doesn't seem to be much policing as to whether he will actually fulfill his end of it as opposed to just kind of nominally. So I think overall, you can see that the administration has other priorities besides the Balkans.
Val, do you agree with this assessment and with the fact that the NSC truly signaled the end of the unipolar era in the U.S. policy towards Europe?
Well, thank you, Ilva. Of course, I always agree with Ambassador Hill. So I'll say, three quick takeaways from this last year. The first one you ask about the NSS. Well, it depends, how you read it. Of course, there's nothing there about the region, but that the lesson learned is that, the Western Balkans and the leaders of the Western Balkans should really take the message that they need to be part of the European solutions when it comes to security, or even more transatlantic solutions. And when I say security, I include here everything, not just traditional economic security, energy security, migration, all the issues. So that's the first part. So part of European security issues. The second, I would say it's more in a positive note that, on December 18th, it was signed into law by the Trump administration, the Western Balkans Democracy and Prosperity Act, and was also incorporated into the U.S. National Defense Authorization Act, which makes it a federal law. So I think that is important. Now, we can look, what are the main topics there. This has been for long, one of the been the vision, also the visionary objective also of Senator Shaheen and the others that wanted to keep the Western Balkans in the agenda. And then the third point, any administration, I think, has been supporting the Euro-Atlantic integration of the Western Balkans. So I don't see a big change here. I would even say that maybe we have had more hearings in the Western Balkans in the last 2 months than we have had in the last 5 years. So maybe that could be a message that something could be moving in direction of paying more attention to the region.
Maja, many argue that President Trump has done more in 1 year in the Balkans than the previous administration, particularly through sanctions targeting Serbia's ties to Russia in Nice. Is that assessment accurate in your view?
Maybe I should start first by agreeing with Ambassador Chris Hill, because that's a trend, a welcome trend here.
There's no requirement.
I will make sure not to agree with Ambassador Hill, so we have some diversity.
Okay, you have the luxury of doing that. Let me remind you, these sanctions were imposed initially by the Biden administration. So going back to that point, they were not implemented, but yes, they were designed at that moment. And, it's hard for me to blame the current U.S. administration for finally implementing the sanctions to Nice after numerous postponements by this same administration. So, in a way, for each one of us living in Serbia and dealing with these kinds of shit, this was expected. Actually, honestly, I expected that earlier. It came now, and now I don't see that we should expect any help from anyone at this point. I'm sure that Russians are not interested in helping us. But on the other hand, I don't even see why anyone would help us, because it should be our decision to say, okay, this is enough. Obviously, no one is stepping back. 4 chairs are no more 4 chairs. It's 1 chair, if one. And so let's do what we need to do. Let's not postpone, because postponement will not help us. So in the beginning of the new administration, I felt as we were completely invisible. But now, as Valbona also said, in the last couple of months, I see that there's an increased interest in the region. For what reasons, I'm not sure. But I really do welcome the fact that the General Staff Complex transferred to Jared Kushner's firm is a good decision that they did it, and they decided not to take it in respect of the Serbian citizens. I also welcome their decision not to import tires from this Chinese company, because we've all known for 2 years what was happening there, and that these conditions were really inhuman. Workers were forced to wear diapers during 8-hour shifts. So if you ask me, this should have happened earlier, and it should have been our decision, not coming from the US. So this sounds as I'm really supporting the politics of this administration, which is not the case. I'm just discussing particular interventions related to this region, and Serbia in particular, in the last couple of months.
Jonathan, while Serbia is being pressed to sever its ties with Moscow in Nice, does that, in your view, weaken Russia's influence not only in Serbia but in the region, perhaps in Bosnia too? Just to remind you that in the NDAA explicitly is framed energy independence as a U.S. national interest, warning that reliance on Russian energy undermines EU integration. How significant is this shift in practice?
Well, thank you. And again, I appreciate the opportunity. Let me say, as you all know, energy is important, but you also have to get it to where it's used. The southern interconnector that needs to come up through the middle of Bosnia and Herzegovina is a very long way from starting, moving up from the Adriatic. How do you get the gas to Serbia that Serbia needs? And is that going to be American gas that begins as LNG? That's a huge question. There are some discussions obviously going on with Hungary and what it can do to supply. Completely replacing Russian energy sources is problematic and difficult. But the United States clearly is interested in that. The embassies in both Zagreb and Sarajevo are talking very actively about the Southern Interconnector as a broader issue. Serbia, exactly as you said, this is both an issue of the past and the immediate future, has to deal with the fact that sanctions are imminent and in place, and some solution needs to be found in just the next few weeks. That'll be one of the most important developments of 2026. The broader political issue of cooperation with Russia or sympathy towards Russia, there's no question that for their own reasons, people in the Balkans, just like us, like people around the world, want the war in Ukraine to end. This is a constant irritant and complicating factor, more so for Serbia, that at least has only one president and a fairly unified foreign policy, as opposed to Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is literally all over the map. Dodik, and not just Dodik, but the opposition in Republika Srpska will continue to pay a great deal of respect and lip service to their fellow Orthodox Russians, whoever is in power in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So the Russian influence continues to be strong, and I appreciate some of the directions that have changed in U.S. policy over the course of the year.
So you confirm that there has been some changes compared to the previous administration?
Yes, I would go back, frankly, to the remarks made by Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau at the first of at least 30 Dayton commemorations, commemorating 30 years since the Dayton Peace, which was an extremely important accomplishment. It ended a war that seemed as if it could not be ended. But he made very clear that the U.S. was interested in people developing their own solutions and not having the U.S. impose solutions and have as active a nation-building role. as has been the case through many previous administrations. Even in the first Trump administration, this was not a message that we heard. We've seen this implemented and discussed in a variety of ways. They were very pleased to be the first administration, to my knowledge, to so rapidly lift OFAC, meaning Office of Foreign Assets Control sanctions, when Dodik stepped down as president of the Republika Srpska, when he and his party removed three of the most frustrating, most obstructive laws that had been passed in the RS National Assembly. Then sanctions were lifted. Like a lot of politicians, and not just in Bosnia or the Balkans, he thrives on saying outrageous things and getting all of the attention of the public and the media. That is definitely problematic. But I would say that there have been clear shifts. And one of the reasons why we're seeing congressional activity, of course, is frustration by both Democrats and Republicans on the Hill. This has been made very clear, including in some of these hearings, with the administration's new approach to the region.
This is exactly helping me to lead to my question to Amanda, our congressional star with 20 years of experience there. Amanda, what does this surge in congressional engagement mean for the Western Balkans in 2025, and what we should be watching for 2026 from Congress?
Sure, no, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I would start with just a bit of a different frame on the Trump administration. I think, they're a bunch of businessmen, right? And so it's a very transactional nature. So I think where the intersection of interests align in the Balkans, and I think that that's where you will see action. I think Jonathan made a good point of this southern interconnection in Bosnia. So there's, renewed interest on this, and it needs to happen. So I think, the intersection of interests is where you will probably see the Trump administration engage most fully. It was a pretty year to the Hill. It was a pretty busy year on the Hill. Senator Shaheen started the year with a hearing on the U.S. policy towards the Balkans. There was a hearing on the NATO summit on the Black Sea Fleet. There was a hearing in the House Foreign Affairs Committee about the Balkans as a flashpoint, which I know was a little bit spicy, but happened nonetheless. There was a hearing by the Helsinki Commission with really excellent witnesses about the 30 years of Dayton. So, it was a really busy year. There's a lot of interest. The members of Congress and senators who know the Balkans know it well, and I think that they've taken a lot of interest, especially with, the 30 years since Dayton really was an inflection point for the Hill. So I think that's kind of why you saw such interest, and I anticipate that it will continue.
How much power has the Congress on the U.S. On the Trump administration decisions, Amanda?
Yeah, I think that depends on what decisions we're talking about, right? The Trump administration
Let's
is
say
everywhere.
the sanctions on Dodik, for instance. Excuse me for interrupting. Yeah.
No, that's fine. I think it's the prerogative of the administration to levy sanctions. Although what you saw in the Western Balkans Democracy and Prosperity Act is the codification of executive orders that sets out very specific criteria for sanctions. So congressional intent is very clear, but it is up to the administration to make the determination if there have been violations and then to imply sanctions. So I think on sanctions, which is the purview of the administration, Congress has given guidance and direction, but the implementation does belong to the executive.
Val, do you agree with the assessment that Washington is moving on from a democracy promotion and domestic political engineering toward more transactional doctrine? Basically, there are no more permanent friends, there are permanent interests.
I don't know if I'll fully agree with that. Even going back to NSS, there's been a lot of, media and experts that have been talking about that. But it really depends how you read it. Of course, there's the, tougher language or different language than before. However, it's made very clear that Europe is an ally and the United States wants a strong, Europe to on her side. So, I don't know, about democracy promotion, what we will see in the coming years. But one thing that could say it's made clear, it's not just in the United States, but we're seeing that more also in Europe, that economic security is becoming national security. It's been the case, I think, for, in the last few years since Russia's second invasion of Ukraine. That many of those tools can be used as weapons by our adversaries. So I believe in the case of the Western Balkans, I've always used to say that economic security is the main security challenge that we see in the Western Balkans. So I believe that there could be some space there to do more from that perspective and really help and support the economic development of the region. Maja was talking before about Chinese investment. There are studies out there, and we can see that countries that have had these kinds of investments, not maybe coming serious for Western countries, are backsliding in some of the standards that those investments are bringing with them, are actually slowing down the European integration process of those countries that are hosting these kind of investments. So I think you asked the question, how could the Western Balkans use this opportunity? They could use this opportunity to attract more like European investment, but also American investment, which in the moment it's extremely low, both from the trade perspective, but also from the foreign direct investment perspective.
But why is that? Because there is no interest from the region to attract U.S. interest, or there are no U.S. Economies and companies that are interested in the Balkans?
Well, a couple
And
of
how
things.
can we change that?
Yes, a couple of things there. The very first thing is that foreign investors, serious investors, are looking for stability, are looking for rule of law, are looking for countries that can easily fight corruption and have fair judiciary systems. And so that's why we have to talk about an economic rule of law. How do you set, the standards in place to attract those serious investors? The second thing, the countries in the Western Balkans are too small, are too insignificant from the market perspective to attract a big investment. So that's why what the European Union has been pushing, but also the United States has been pushing over the years, has been the regional economic integration, that all these countries, we're talking about the 6 Western Balkan countries, can become a slightly a bigger market that could appeal to the foreign investors, in this case also coming from the United States. And then the third element, which could be helpful in the case of the Western Balkans now, is the geopolitical moment. Now economic security is related to geopolitics. And so from the strategic position that the countries have, be that on energy security and other areas, it could be an opportunity. But I think that the window of opportunity will not be open for too long. So I don't know when the lesson will be learned to act quickly.
Ambassador Hill, you have always advocated for strengthening economic cooperation. Do you see any change in that regard?
Well, I think the process is pretty much stalled these days. I don't think it's as high on the agenda as it should be. I think it does indeed relate to the issue of the size of the markets. And in most of the Balkan countries, the size of the markets make them of insignificance to major investors, especially American investors who are so many thousands of miles away. So I think that's a big problem. And also, as I've said many times, countries, we may be interested, or the Europeans may be interested in these countries, but they're not interested in these countries' squabbles with each other. And so the degree to which you can have a situation where Serbia and Albania are somehow getting along after, a few centuries is of interest, but it seems not to be of interest to enough people. So I think the whole issue of the Open Balkans, which was, I thought, a very modest, sui generis event trying to engender within the countries a sense of being the same neighborhood, that seemed to have fallen victim to a sort of German play on the issue of the Berlin process. You always have to be suspicious of things called process. And why would you name something having to do with the Balkans after the capital city of a country in Northwest Europe. So, there's a kind of lack of sincerity in the seriousness of it. But I really want to stress for those who think that somehow the Trump administration is just a continuation and maybe amelioration or tougher or a greater interest in the Balkans. I beg to differ. I mean, I think we have a situation where this Trump administration is besieged by a lot of problems which it barely understands, and the Balkans is really something it doesn't understand. This issue of Nice, this was not an issue to sanction Serbia. This was an issue to try to get Russia to constrain Russian influence in the non-Russian space, namely, in this case, namely the Balkans. So, yes, it was begun during the Biden administration. The whole idea was to reverse a very bad decision that Serbia made to sell Nice to the Russians. Now, Serbia has made a lot of bad decisions, but this is probably up there in the pantheon of those bad decisions. So the Biden administration took a whack at it, and the Trump administration agrees, but there's been no effort to try to make this happen in a way that leads to what the overall effort is, which is to reduce Russian influence. If anything, the Russians are looking like the good guys wanting to supply energy to Serbia, while we have not helped Serbia find alternatives. So I think really there needs to be a much more comprehensive interest. And it's hard to imagine when you have that a national security strategy. If you read that over, it was nothing short of insulting to the Europeans. And if you don't think it was insulting, ask what the Europeans thought of it. They felt insulted by the whole thing. So we have a major North Atlantic problem here. And to sort of pretend that we're kind of moving along nicely with sharing values and getting the Serbs or the others to, have the rule of law and things like that. We're nowhere near that right now. We have a fundamental problem with Europe, and I hope that can be addressed in 2026.
Well, you wanted to reply or to say something on that view?
No, it was super. I mean, I agree, but I think the Berlin process, as a quick reminder, that was pushed by Germany and by Berlin in order to keep the European Union integration of the region still alive, because it was during the Juncker's Commission that was a big political mistake that the moratorium on enlargement was announced towards the Western Balkans. And I think that was one of those political mistakes that brought a lot of backsliding in the region over the years. It looks like the European Commission now has woken up, and it's putting enlargement as one of the main priorities, but we can discuss that maybe later.
We will discuss that later.
I would just like to make I get the Juncker Commission, I get all this stuff, but if you're a Macedonian truck driver stuck at a border for 8 hours with your peaches and pears, it doesn't mean a lot to you. And I think the whole issue of European enlargement seems to be an elusive concept if you're some kind of person trying to make your livelihood in the Balkans. So that's why I thought it was valuable in the past year or so when Jim O'Brien and others were pushing the single market. That seemed like a more realistic proposition. I mean, I don't think these countries need to be voting members for now. In fact, I would argue something that Macron has made the point. Why do we want people to be voting members if they use their votes in the way that Bulgaria did against Macedonia? So I think it would be very useful to work on the economic side of this, which is a single market. But even that seems to be an elusive concept right now because so much else is up in the air.
And I have so many topics to cover, so let's not go into details about the EU enlargement right now. Maja, in the national security strategy, it stated that President Trump negotiated peace between Serbia and Kosovo. The National Defense Authorization Act endorses February 2023 path to normalization agreement, calls for an immediate implementation of the annex, and crucially makes it clear that U.S. policy rejects rejects any land swaps, partition, or redrawing borders from ethnic lines. What does this hard line mean for the future of U.S. diplomacy and the trajectory of Kosovo-Serbia relations, in your view?
I wish I wish I knew. I really have no idea what this means. Maybe two of the ambassadors could help me understand. I mean, I'm glad you started by whispering that Trump has solved the war between Kosovo and Serbia, because obviously we at least the six of us here know well that has nothing to do with the reality. But then I was puzzled, I have to say, and maybe Amanda would also want to add something. Does this really mean some kind of renewed commitment? Or it's just, going with the business as usual, let's just say something about it. I'm really not sure, and I'd really like to understand.
So I do have an opinion, and I think it's important to draw a distinction between the national security strategy and the NDAA, right? I know there is much hyperventilating and concern about the national security strategy. It is a unilateral political document that was created by the White House, which is 100% their prerogative, right? They didn't have to coordinate with anyone. They didn't have to ask anyone's permission. They wrote what they wanted, and that is very clear. The NDAA is a bipartisan work product of many, many months, and I think it's just a more accurate reflection of U.S. sentiment toward Europe and the world because it is a bipartisan collaborative document. Now, there are different roles between the executive and the legislative branch when it comes to foreign policy. But, interpreting what the language in the Western Balkans Democracy and Prosperity Act means, it means that the U.S. Congress believes that Kosovo and Serbia should return to the normalization table. It believes that Congress, has these thoughts and has given this direction. Again, a lot, but not all, excuse me, of the prerogative to enforce it or implement it is the executives. But, there's a role for Congress as well. Individual members and senators can weigh into these issues and become leaders to help affect change. But I think it is important to draw that distinction between those two documents.
Jonathan, on this particular aspect, Kosovo-Serbia normalization, I found it important that in the NDAA is stated that the U.S. policy rejects any land swaps, partition, or redrawing borders. What do you think about that? And do you think that the U.S. administration will be invested in a final solution for Kosovo-Serbia?
I would use a different phrase to talk about a solution, but look, the short answer is I don't think it's going to be led by the Trump administration, to follow your question. But I would also say the chance of seeing any progress there whatsoever in 2026 is extremely low. We're waiting to see, of course, what happens with these elections coming up in Kosovo in less than a week. Will they transform Kosovo into a functioning democracy? I hope so, but the chances are not guaranteed. Meanwhile, in Serbia, a large group of people are pushing for elections, but it's not certain whether those will happen. I think it's very easy for Belgrade at this point to say, look, nothing is sorted out in Pristina. How can we even sit down and talk with them? This is a subject of great frustration to people like Peter Sorensen, of course. Pristina can also say, what's going on in Belgrade? Look at these protests. Are they going to have elections? It's their fault, not our fault. And in the meantime, quote unquote, progress is the ping pong of either recognizing or de-recognizing Kosovo pushed by Pristina and, of course, pushed in the opposite direction by Belgrade. So it's difficult to be optimistic about anything in the immediate future between Kosovo and Serbia. However, I'm glad you pointed out what's in the NDAA. It's extremely important that some of the idiot ideas of land swaps that look so good, like we're all playing a game of diplomacy, or some version of chess that involve people's lives and borders. We don't want to see the change of borders in Europe. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia, of course, is one of those attempts. land swaps are not a strategy, and I can't see this administration, transactional as it may be on occasion, supporting that idea.
Ambassador Hill, you know I'm going to ask you about this now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see Serbian Kosovo recognition on anyone's to-do list. I think there was a normalization agreement. I think that is worth pushing. If I were Sorensen, I'd pick up the ball with this so-called Oakert agreement. But I don't see the pressure on Serbia to recognize Kosovo. And I certainly don't see the Serbs doing it on their own. And by the way, I don't see any Serb political entity, whether government or opposition or students or anyone, pushing this. So I really don't see it on the agenda. What I'd like to see is normalization so that they can kind of figure out what they're going to do with this community of Serbs. I mean, we're down to a community of a handful of people. There's no one's talking about land swaps. This was something that came up again because Grinnell had pushed this earlier on. But I think the real issue is, can you get some kind of normalization and avoid these crises every 2 weeks? And can Corti kind of understand that there are more people in the world than just himself, and he needs to work with others? Because my sense is the Europeans are extremely frustrated with him. Finally, I'd like to say, I know it was considered a big deal, and I know the Serbs were very pleased when they saw that the strategic dialogue was canceled with Kosovo. I think we should be having strategic dialogues with everybody. I don't see what the value in canceling something. It's supposed to be an opportunity to sit down with senior people and talk about what ails the relationship. And instead, it's been turned into a reward for good behavior. It certainly hasn't gotten that from Corti. And on the contrary, we've left him more isolated, and I don't think that's been helpful. So it was odd to me that the reaction to the cancellation of the strategic dialogue was people saying, well, let's also cancel the one with Serbia. Why would that help? I mean, I really think we should have them with everybody, and I'd start with Serbia and go on with Kosovo and do the rest of them.
If I can jump in on the recognition question very quickly, I was referring to the news just the other day that, for example, Bahamas has recognized Kosovo. This, totting up the list of is it 112 countries or 114 or 98. And then the Serbian Foreign Ministry spending a lot of time in the third world, in the middle of the Pacific, on islands with 15,000 people, trying to push Kosovo recognition away. Not the fundamental issue. I agree with Chris. The fundamental issue is moving towards normalization between Belgrade and Pristina.
And let me ask Ambassador Hill, how does this normalization look in your view, or how can it be translated to the people in the region? What does normalization mean? And from the day you arrived and you left as ambassador in Belgrade, do you think you left Serbia closer to the EU?
On normalization, or what do you mean?
On its position towards the EU.
I think you have to be careful with the concept that an American ambassador or any ambassador can move Serbia and the EU closer together. I mean, this is a proposition that's kind of up to the Serbs especially, but also up to the European Union. And I think we know that the European Union has a lot of pushing and pulling between the Commission on the one hand and the member states who feel that the Commission and others have moved too fast on immigration, et cetera. So in many ways, this has nothing to do with the Balkans and even less to do with us, except in the kind of raw politics of it. But I really think that there could be an arrangement for this Serbian community in North Mitrovica, which numbers on a good day less than 70,000. This is not about returning Kosovo to Serbia or dividing Kosovo or any of these other things. This is about finding arrangements where a community can wake up in the morning and see what their futures are, living in the homes that they have. And the fact that that wasn't done, I think, is to everybody's shame.
Are you talking about arrangements that are under Kosovo government administration?
No, I'm talking about the Ohrid Agreement, which was a really good starting point, and I'm just very frustrated that it wasn't completed. Look, the idea is that if Serbia normalizes with Kosovo, then you could get the other EU countries to normalize with Kosovo, because a lot of countries have their own Kosovos, if you will. So I understand that proposition, but it's got to be done with Serbia and Kosovo both agreeing on the solution. If there's a perception that Serbia has a gun on its head about normalizing, you're not necessarily going to get these other European countries to come forward. They all have their Kosovos. That's why they're objecting. So it needs to be done in a much more of a win-win concept, but, win-win for these people dealing with this seem to be the name of a Burmese dissident or something. They had no idea what a win-win really is.
Maja, how is the sentiment in Serbia about this NSS, if there was any echo in the media or the public perception on that? And where is Serbia regarding potential elections? Is there any decision taken?
Yeah, on NSS, not that much discussion, more on the Democracy and Prosperity Act, I have to say, because it had a more precise language. Special attention was paid to the section talking about the possibility of individual sanctions. So there's an expectation that we will hear more about that in the coming days. As for the Serbian elections, no date so far. No announcement other than President Vučić's mentioned that it could be May or rather October, November next year, but that's nothing for that we can really hold on to. If you ask me, I think that the elections are the right and only way to get out of this crisis, which many frame as political crisis, but I think that in its core, it's an institutional crisis. And what we've seen during this now more than a year of civic protests is that the citizens of Serbia are no more willing to accept to live in a system without checks and balances, without accountability, without free media, without free and fair elections. And I don't see that going down. The latest polls show that 50% of the citizens in Serbia think the country is going in the wrong direction, and only 1/3 thinks they're going in the right direction. So I don't see why the government is reluctant to call for elections and just to give everyone an opportunity to say if these numbers are right or wrong, and see, because that's the way democracies measure the support of any party. So we do remain hopeful that 2026 will lead to elections, more free and fair elections than the ones we've seen so far.
And on that note, on the sanctions, Amanda, you may not know this, but in the region, in the countries, the media is talking about this 90 days deadline for the President Trump to impose sanctions. Just to clarify on if you can help us understand better, on the NDAA is stated that within 90 days against corruption and the destabilizing activity across the Balkans, the president is mandated to act. How can we explain it to our audience? What does that mean, and do you expect any actions on that?
Sure. I have my bill right here. Look, the language
Does
says,
it say that? Just to clarify to the Balkan capitals.
No, of course. So what the bill says is that, first of all, it says the president shall. That is the strongest language that Congress uses. If they don't really mean it, they use may. So it says the president shall impose sanctions, but then the determination for a series of violations, including corruption or destabilizing the region or trying to unravel Dayton or Ohrid or others. So it says the president shall impose these sanctions, but it is still up to the administration to determine the violation. So again, Congress has been clear, but the determination of violation does belong to the administration. But it is as strong of language as Congress can make. But again, the final and so I do think that what this signals is a renewed examination of actors who may be engaged in corruption, engaged in destabilizing actions. So I think that there should in the region be a little bit of awareness, but the determination will belong to the executive to impose the sanctions at the end of the day.
This sounds like a bit of mixed signals since in October the sanctions were lifted for Milorad Dodik. Do you think the region will get more, the politicians in the region will get sanctioned, Ambassador Hill?
Honestly, I don't think so. I think there could be sanctioning, although clearly President Trump has decided that high tariffs are an easier way to impose sanctions and a more something that's more felt by countries. I mean, he would be in favor, if he had sanctions, he'd be in favor of sectoral sanctions rather than going after individuals. So frankly, I think it's a beautiful piece of legislation. Don't get me wrong. It deserves a frame around it and read to every school child in America, but I'm not sure the president will ever read that.
Jonathan, do you have an opinion on that?
I also like the language in the NDAA, but of course, anybody who thinks that the president must do something and somehow he'll be policed if he doesn't understand what Amanda just explained. It is the strongest possible language, but it can't make him do anything. I do think the issue of corruption is a complicated one. On one hand, we know it's omnipresent, and not just in that region, but in other parts of the world. There are specific sanctions tied to reports of corruption that have been used actually since the first Trump administration, going back to 2018. The problem is there's not a lot of correlation between actual legal prosecution of people for corruption and accusations leveled by one opponent at another, either in politics or in business. So there are people whose families and as individuals are sanctioned for corruption. And at the same time, many other people are being prosecuted for corruption. They're not subject to the same sanctions. So it's a bit of a muddle. Corruption is unfortunately a reality. I don't think the Trump administration is going to expend, as has been said by others, a great deal of energy in cracking down on it.
Val, the NDAA calls on the Secretary of State to expand technical assistance on anti-corruption strategies, support independent media. Do you think there will be some meaningful change?
Well, that's good news that there's, more will go there when it comes to supporting all the institutional reforms. And you also mentioned independent media. I believe that that's, we have to see now what mechanisms and what institutions and funding will be used to support the civil society also in the Western Balkans, since all the aid from U.S. aid was cut in the region, and so there's something needed to replace that support for independent media and civil society. But as a final point, I think that we really might need something a little bit disruptive on the region too, because business as usual cannot go on forever. And that, I think, if there is one lesson to be learned, is that we have to see something working differently in the Western Balkans in 2026.
Final round, and one prediction each in one short sentence if you can. Ambassador Hill, what is a single event or a breakthrough that we should be all watching in 2026?
I think, I just mentioned Serbia. I think the biggest problem Serbia has been its energy dependence on Russia. I think if that can be broken, it denies a lot of leverage to Russia and to its supporters. And so my happy New Year prediction is that Nice is successfully transferred out of Russian hands after an 11th hour issue. And I would like to predict that the EU will take action, but that on trying to move more quickly on these countries, but that is the proverbial eighth marriage, a triumph of hope over experience.
Jonathan, what is your one single event that you think will happen?
Well, we know that there will be elections in Bosnia in October 2026. They will quickly be eclipsed by elections in the United States in November 2026. That will be a key indication whether Dodik has actually suffered as a result of the back and forth of having been on sanctions, whether he benefits from the sanctions being lifted. So who succeeds in the RS? Is it Dodik's party or is it a different party? The opposition is still very fragmented there and in the rest of Bosnia because Dodik is not the only person causing problems there. He's not the only subject. Seeing who the Bosniak and Croat members of the presidency are, this could not exactly bring the whole country together, but it will help determine the direction for Bosnia and Herzegovina for the next few years.
Maja, what's your pick for 2026? What shall we want?
We haven't mentioned Montenegro today, and I think it's at least not fair or if not wrong. I think we should all be happy for the progress that both Montenegro and Albania have made in the past year on EU enlargement. At least that's how I feel. And if they would be able to complete this process with all due stages in next couple of years, I think it will be a strongest pull for the rest of the region to continue dreaming that dream and fighting that fight. As for Serbia, as I already mentioned, I really hope that we will have at least freer and fairer elections than before, because I think what at least half of Serbia is hoping for is some kind of democratic normality. No more than that. But I think it's badly needed. And I think this would be a very strong signal for the entire region.
Val?
Well, I don't like to make predictions, especially when it comes to the future. So, but really, on a positive note, I'm optimistic as a person. So, I believe that with this new maybe level of attention, both from the European Union that we have seen over the last year, from the United States, I really hope that the region will become part of bigger regional solutions. So not just the Western Balkans, but considering the American investment in Greece that we're seeing it's been increased, in Italy, in the other Southern European countries, we will see more genuine interest into investing in a region and viewing it as for the geopolitical importance that it has.
Thank you, Val. Amanda, I know you and I will have more meetings on the Hill, but what do you think on the region? What will happen in the region?
Sure. No, my hope springs eternal, and don't laugh, but I'm going to say it anyway, for Bosnian constitutional reform. I think it is
Not laughing, but I know it's hard to happen in 2026.
No, I know. But look at it very practically. It is the stuff of legend of constitutional reform. There's the April package and, other attempts at reform. And I think with the 30-year anniversary of Dayton, there's been a lot of thought put to how Bosnia could do this. There's actually a report that was released in February called A Policymaker's Guide to Constitutional Reform. Lots of people are thinking about this. So I think that the path technically can be found. It's just the political will and removing external pressures from outside Bosnia on all those who have an opinion about how Sarajevo should run, but who do not live there. So again, this is a difficult year, but I think that this is where Bosnia needs to get for a prosperous future and full EU integration.
Thank you all for this sharp and timely insights. As the Western Balkans head into 2026, the region stands at a critical crossroads, a fundamentally altered U.S. strategic posture, a Europe confronting its own security and political fragilities, and societies that continue persistently to demand democratic European future. So the question now is straightforward. Will President Donald Trump use sanctions decisively against leaders who undermine peace, stability, and democracy? Or will this moment pass? 2026 could mark real breakthroughs. And if it doesn't, the risk is not stagnation, but deeper instability in a region whose strategic importance is once again impossible to ignore. Thank you for joining us in this special edition of Balkans Debrief. Happy New Year to everyone.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Thank you.